Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tech Powder. In this video I'm going to show you how I changed that X5670 and overclocked it to make this gaming computer you see here now. If you remember, I paired that CPU with the X58 Sabertooth motherboard. This is a great motherboard for overclocking, and that's exactly what I did to get the performance. In this video I'm going to show you how I overclocked it, and I'm going to show you some CPU performances before and after. I'm also going to add a little bit at the end showing you about the failure of overclocking. When you overclock, it takes time and you're going to fail a lot, but don't give up, and maybe check out some of the settings that I entered for my build. Let's take a look. Okay, so here we are with the stock Xeon X5670. You can see here the stock frequency is 2.93, and here we have the core multiplier. It's running at about, well, it's turboing up to 2.9 and then dropping back to 1.6. Using the multiplier, it's going up to about 22. Well, it's 22 there, flipping between 12 and 22. That's important, we'll come back to that later, but at stock let's run a CPU benchmark. This is using PassMark performance test 9.1. So let's run it and see what the stock score gets. So this test will run through these different benchmarks. And you see here it's pushing the CPU up to about 3.2, so that's turboing up to 3.2 gigahertz. Let's leave this running and come back to it at the end. Okay, and as you see, the test is just coming to an end. It's run through everything, and after this we'll get our results. Okay, so here we go. These are the results. We've got 7,389. As you can see here, in comparison to the rest of the world, CPUZ has put this in the red, which is below average. Let me show you some real world comparisons, and then we'll look at the overclock. Okay, let's have a look at the comparisons here. We can see that the i5 9600K and the i7 6700K absolutely trounced the Xeon, and that's not to be unexpected. This is a $25 CPU. However, let's have a look at the Ryzen 5s, the 1400 and the 1500X. It's not too far off, and with a little bit of overclocking, I think we can get much closer. So let's have a look at the BIOS and try to do some overclocking. Let's just have a quick look around. We've got the main screen, which has the date and time, and you can select different drives here. This has 6 SATA 2s and 2 SATA 3s on here. There's the AI tweaker, which we'll go into later. The advanced settings for the chipset. Power settings for hardware monitor and fan control. The boot settings for the boot order. And some tools for saving your profile, and RAID, and upgrading the BIOS, I think, is in there. And finally, saving and exiting. Okay, so what we want to do is go into AI tweaker. Now, whether you are an expert at overclocking or not, this board is fantastic. At the moment, everything is on auto, but you can set it to DOCP, which you can see at the top gives you an overclock of 3 gigahertz, or XMP, which makes the timings of your memory correlate to the timings of your CPU. So you get better performance from your CPU and your memory. In theory, that is. Well, what we want to do is go into manual and do things ourselves. So with manual, we'll have to type everything in. First, the CPU ratio. So if you remember from the CPUZ, the multiplier went up to about 22. So we'll type in 22 here. Speed step. So the speed step is how the CPU controls its frequency. If you noticed, before it dropped from 1.6 and went up to 2.9 and turboed, that's controlled with the speed step. We want this disabled to get a more consistent speed. The BCLK, this is tied to the CPU ratio. For example, if I type in 100, you see the clock, the CPU frequency is 2.2 gigahertz. 100 times 2.2. So that controls our speeds. I bump this up to 193, and you see there I get 4.2 gigahertz on the CPU. The PCIe I keep the same. The DRAM frequency. For testing, it's best to keep it the lowest. But I put mine at this one. I've run it stable. You would put yours at the lowest. Run it. If it works, move it up. Test it. Does it work? Move it up. Mine crashed here. I have DDR1333 megahertz memory. I can get this one to work. Uclock. So this needs to be twice the DRAM frequency. I recommend again going with the first one, next one, next one. I can get mine to 3483 megahertz. The QPIE, I recommend setting it to the lowest, which is this one here. And yeah, almost done. So this is everything, all the settings I would use here. If things don't work, you can always move this up or down. The next things I would do is going to the voltages, set this to manual, and I put the CPU voltage at 1.4. It is recommended you keep this at about 1.3, but I found it a little unstable at 1.3, so I put it 1.4. I would not recommend putting this any higher than 1.5. CPU PLL, put at 1.8, which is the recommended by Intel. The DRAM core is 1.3. Again, that's the maximum recommended by Intel. And I put the DRAM bus at 1.5 there. Okay, so that's everything really. I would enable V-droop. V-droop means it stops the voltage from being inconsistent or dropping. Voltage drop, V-droop. And these I just keep auto. These are fine to keep on auto. CPU spread spectrum I would disable. And I think this is Oh no, I would disable this. Yeah. This is if you have any interference with any other component using the similar frequencies. It will change the frequency to adapt to any interference, but it could mess up anything in the overclock, so it is best to disable these. Okay, so that is all done. I would just check the CPU configuration here, make sure everything is okay. And I would make sure these are disabled. These throttle the CPU depending on the heat or on the load, but we want our load to be maximum, and we'll check our heating manually. So that is fine. That is fine. Next thing to do is save and exit. So now here's the test. First, does it boot? Now the first step for any overclocking is, does it enter Windows? If it doesn't enter Windows, restart the system and change the clock settings. This motherboard is actually very good. If you do overclock too much, it will switch off, and then it will restart and let you go back to defaults and enter the BIOS. If something doesn't work, you can press the Mem OK button on this board and you can restart with default settings. Okay, so we're into Windows, which is a good sign. Let's open CPUZ and see where we are at. Okay, so again, it's the X5670. Everything is 2.9. This is all normal. And yes, so we've got 4.2 at a multiplier of 22. This is staying fairly consistent. I like to use this program when overclocking. This is Open Hardware Monitor, and we can see here the maximum speed and also the temperature, which we have to be careful of. We don't want to go over 96 degrees, which is the maximum for this CPU. Okay, so let's run PassMark again, and let's see if I can get everything on here. Just to show you, let's run the same test. Yes. Okay, again, so we can see it's running the test. We are at 4.2. We can see here as well, we're running at 4.2, and we can see our temperatures slowly increasing. Hopefully the fan will keep it under control. Okay, and coming to the end of our test, you can see here the temperatures did creep up a little bit, but were well below maximum. Well below maximum. They're creeping up a little bit, and you can see here we increased our score. So let's have a look at that, and let's have a look at some comparisons. Okay, I think the first thing you'll notice is the huge jump. We're now on 9,977, and we can see that although we're not anywhere near the 9600 or 6700Ks, we have actually pulled ahead of the 1400, and actually now we're more closer to the Ryzen 1500x. So anybody looking to buy a 1500X should definitely check out these CPUs, especially if you're on a budget. Okay, so you've seen it working, but I also want to show you what it looks like when it doesn't work. So for example, here I've put the B clock up to 200, which now gives me a CPU frequency of 4.4 gigahertz. I've lowered the DRAM to base and uClock to base as well, the lower settings. Now this won't work. This won't work at all. Let me show you what that looks like. So I exit, restart the system. And the board is very good. It should boot. You can see there 4.4 gigahertz, looking good. Everything's good here. Booting into Windows. And no. So we get the Windows message. It didn't boot in. It has an error message, but we know why. We know why. It's because the clock is too high. So the system will reboot. All we do is we press delete again to get into our BIOS. And we go down and we think, okay, well, 200. Let's go down to 195, which is 4.2.9, 4.29. And we save and exit. We have another go. System booting up. Now, because Windows didn't restart properly last time, it does this automatic repair. But we know what the problem is, and there is no solution with software repair. So there's nothing this can do, but we have to wait it out. Once it's finished, we can just boot back into Windows again. Unfortunately, when you're overclocking, this will be taking up the majority of your time. I wish there was a way to skip this, but unfortunately Windows is trying to solve the problem which it can't solve. So it couldn't load properly. Do you want to restore? No, because it's not a software problem. We just go to cancel, and advanced options, and then just say continue into Windows. This will restart the system and boot normally into Windows. If our overclock works, it will go into Windows and we can do some more tests. If not, we'll get the same error screen and we'll have to go back into our BIOS. So this is booting into regular Windows. And it booted. We are in Windows, in our overclock. Let's load CPUZ. Have a look. So there we are, 4.29. Let's check our temperatures. So at the moment we are okay. And we can do a stress test. I use IDA64 to do a stress test. You go into Tools, System Stability Test, and click Start. You see here we're at 4.29, everything's at 4.29. Temperatures are looking good. So we would run this for about maybe about 10 minutes. If the system locks up, we'd simply restart the system and again do the same thing until we get a good clock that works. Let's stop this here. Okay, let's exit out of this. So let's say we found a good clock. Let's say it worked, it was stable. Next thing I like to do is start CineBench. This is a rendering software and it really tests the CPU. So we can see our 6-core 12-threaded CPU, 4.29 gigahertz, and we run the multi-threaded test here. And as you can see, so this software is testing all of the cores, each rendering one square of the image. If this test crashes, the system is unstable. As you can see, it did. Okay, so that means we need to go back into the BIOS and change the settings and keep doing that until we get a good stable system. Maybe we can have a guess why it crashed. It's running temperatures here at 95 degrees, which is the maximum temperature here. Maybe that was a little bit too hot. The threshold for this CPU is 96 degrees, so maybe just 95 was pushing it a little too hard. So we'll just go back, change the settings again, go back again. But of course you can use my settings, they work fine. If you need to dial it back, you can. Everybody's CPU is a little bit different. If you can get a little more out of it, that's good news for you. But that's how we do the overclocking. Well, that's it for this episode of Tech Powder. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Tech Powder, and remember, please do subscribe. It really helps me a lot, and I'm trying to make the channel grow. I'll put links to all the tools that I use and the software for overclocking down in the description below. And if you want to try it, please do. Get one of these cheap CPUs and turn it into a gaming computer. That's it for today. See you guys.